All right, so Katie Witbeck is going to be our first presenter today. She's going to present her research with Dr. Tawari on evaluating the feasibility of pearl millet as an alternative warm season forage crop. Yes. All right, I'll let you take over. If you want to resize this.
Perfect. Does this clicker actually work?
Yes, it should. We shall see.
All right. So as Dr. Dillman said, I'll be talking about evaluating the economic feasibility of pearl millet as an alternative warm season annual forage crop in West Tennessee. As you can tell, it really rolls off the tongue. So before we really get into the economic side, we first need to kind of go over what our research was going into this and why we're doing it. So in West Tennessee, we primarily use cool season forages for our crops. So these perennials that we use, in particular, we use tall fescue. And with tall fescue, it's great because in the spring and in the late fall, it has some really good production. But in the summertime, we see a decrease in the production for these cool season forages. So between kind of July through September, October-ish. And so what we're looking at with our research is kind of trying to figure out what we can do to help take care of that slump so that it's not something that stresses farmers that they have to worry about. So we've been looking at alternative warm season annuals that can be used not to replace the tall fescue, but simply to supplement it. So if it can be run in rotation with other crops or anything like that, so that way as your production decreases in this section here, their production is going to increase. And so it's going to help the farmers coast through and not see a decrease in production for forages. So, and it's also something we're hoping that can be used just as emergency pasture or, like I said, in part of a crop rotation. So then with our economic research, we're looking to analyze the alternate warm season forages for use in West Tennessee. Specifically in West Tennessee, we haven't looked in any other regions yet. And so with our research, we looked at 3 different forages and we chose 2 varieties of each. So we have sorghum Sudan grass, teff, and then pearl millet, which is what I have my economic analysis of. So these are all newer introductions to West Tennessee. So as far as like making our budgets and stuff goes, later on you'll see it was a little bit difficult just because these are new introductions. So for the research part, we planned these in our test plot here that you can see the picture of. And so we harvested our samples 30 days, 40 days, 50 days, and then 60 days after planting. So that way we can monitor the growth, check and see how well it was all producing. And we were also looking at regrowth. So after the samples were harvested, and they were like randomly selected sections that we harvested, after harvesting them, we weighed them immediately and then dried them. And after drying them, we took the dry weights again to see what it would look like if it were harvested as hay and fed to livestock later on. So what we were looking at as far as the ground samples went is neutral detergent fiber, acid detergent fiber, crude protein, and in vitro true digestibility. And so we're looking just kind of at the different nutrients and stuff that we can get for livestock and seeing if not only production-wise these are good alternatives, but also if nutrient-wise they are on par with the cool season perennials that we're currently using. So now to the economic part. So our research objective was to evaluate the feasibility and economic decision factors determining the effectiveness of the use of pearl millet as an alternative warm season annual forage in West Tennessee. And so basically we're looking at the end of the day, not only is this something that can be used, but is it something that farmers will be willing or able to adopt? Because if economically it is not a good option, then farmers aren't going to choose it. So to do this, we created two different financial statements, the first of which was an enterprise budget. So with our enterprise budget, the production year we're looking at is the summer of 2022. And the seed variety we're using is Pearl Millet Tip Leaf 3. So there were two different Pearl Millet varieties that we had. I chose Tip Leaf 3 because we had a better yield and also the seed cost was a little bit lower. So for the enterprise budget, we used it to measure the economic determinants of production and crop yield on a per acre basis. And while making this, because enterprise budgets are specifically for your farm where you're producing, we use all local prices to make it more realistic to our production. So for revenue, we have, as you can see, $137.59 for the actual pearl millet. Then one thing we did that is a little bit different is we had a weight gain estimation. This is very much a rough estimation, but this is us just trying to figure out how much a farmer would be able to save essentially if they are using pearl millet to feed their livestock instead of purchasing in forage when they see this dip. And so that is still some rough math that we're trying to kind of figure out a little bit. Then, so for variable costs, the main thing that I want to draw attention to is if you look at the first item on here, the seed. For 1 acre of planting, seed cost for pearl millet is $70.80. That is really expensive when you compare it to our current forage crops that we use. And so that's kind of been one of the things that we're really looking at from this economic standpoint. But at the end of it, we had a positive gross margin for variable cost or for our costs and everything of $95.19. So then when you move into fixed costs and get down finally to the net revenue, we did unfortunately have a net loss of $14.41. So with that, it could be a lot of things, and we're kind of trying to look at that and figure out what it is that caused the net loss, because for this to be something that's economically feasible, we need to be able to get it to be a revenue in order for farmers to be willing to adapt it. But let's see here. So with the results and limitations though, so with our net loss of $14.41, we do think there are some possible reasons for it. So we did have a decreased yield. 2022 was a drought year, and so our production just was not very good to begin with. We also had a lot of issues with pig weeds in the trial field that we were using. So weed control issues may have very well been another issue. Also, as you kind of see here, we have leased equipment, and so it's not owned. With that equipment lease, if it's owned by a farmer, that may also make a big difference on their costs. And finally, which also I think is the biggest one, is the seed cost. It's just so high right now because it's a new introduction. And also we had a small test plot size, so all of our costs are concentrated in a less than an acre patch of what we were using for our test field. So then after the enterprise budget, we did a sensitivity analysis. With the sensitivity analysis, we used it to look at the impact of seed cost and nitrogen-based fertilizers on gross margins. So gross margins are revenue minus the sum of variable costs and interest. So with these, this is pretty much what we came up with, and all we're looking at is which one has the biggest impact, whether it's seed cost or nitrogen-based fertilizers. And as you can see, so the one on the right here is the changes in seed cost. Seed cost has a large impact on gross margins. So if somehow we can find a way to lower the cost of the seed, then that will really help with increasing gross margins and hopefully getting us to a net revenue. So in conclusion, seed costs have the largest impact on gross margin as far as the sensitivity analysis goes. That's going to be one of the main issues that we need to address. So one solution is just if pearl millet becomes more common within West Tennessee, as you get a larger supply, it's gonna be less scarce, and that's gonna drop the seed cost on its own. And lowering that seed cost will make it a much more viable option for farmers in West Tennessee. And then as far as future research goes, so we need to continue repeating this experiment, especially the harvest data and everything. So that way we can see what it looks like in different areas, also in years that it's not a drought year, so that way we can get a more accurate look at what the yield is gonna be. And then expanding to different locations, because pearl millet is newer to West Tennessee, and so we wanna see where it grows best, what soil types and everything. And then finding a better average yield and also figuring out better weight gain calculations, so that way we can make sure that we're looking at that as accurately as possible. Thank you. Yes.
So you said one of these was probably that you had a small test plot. You said you leased equipment.
Yes.
So that could be a very high sunk cost, right?
Mhm.
If you scale this up, say 200 times, would that
Yes.
get you out of this sort of net loss area?
It should help a lot with it, just because then instead of having all your costs concentrated in 1 acre, you would have, I can't remember what the least equipment cost was, but I think it's like $20 or something like that a day. You would have that $20 spread over 200 acres instead of 1 acre. And so then you would have, I believe it's, what would that be, 10 cents an acre for the seed, for the cost, instead of $20 an acre.
Right, if your net loss is $14.
Then that right there would.
Yeah.
Exactly, so, yeah, we definitely need to do this research on a larger scale and a different size plot, because just that alone would make a huge difference in our results.
So you're just assuming the least cost, because on our actual work, we used our own farm drill and there wasn't,
Yes,
you know,
I believe they applied what the cost would be if we were leasing the equipment to another farm.
so a lot of farmers have the drill, what I wanted to ask, is pro millet's actually been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And so your cost associated that you used was for this newer variety, right?
Yes,
So
sir.
you should maybe get some prices for pearl millet seed of older varieties, because it'll be a lot cheaper.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely something we need to look at too, is the different varieties, because that was the cheaper of the two varieties, and obviously over $70 is not something that most people are gonna wanna spend.
Where do they grow pearl millets for seed?
I can't remember.
I gotta ask a plant science question.
Yeah. I can't remember where I wanna say it's from Africa, but I'm not entirely sure. I certainly don't wanna be quoted on that. I know it's,
It's gotta be somewhere in the US. He wouldn't have reported it.
yeah. I know,
Well,
that's
I
the
guess
country
maybe
it
a company
originated
could have
from.
afforded it.
I know it was difficult to get a hold of the seed, and it took a while for it to get to
Okay.
us.
I have
I'm
no
not
clue.
entirely sure.
I have no clue. I just wondered if you did.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
So you alluded to two other crops that were being looked at as well, teff
Yes.
and sorghum grass.
Yes.
Sorghums.
Okay. Well, how did those fare? I mean, I know that may not have been yours, but was somebody else working on those?
So we did look at teff. So far with teff, I believe we had a very small net revenue, but still is a net revenue, so that was great. We still haven't had a chance to look at the sorghum stand grass yet, though.
Okay.
And so that'll hopefully be further down the road, we'll be able to look at that as well.
Relative to pearl millet, you get a much higher yield than dry matter, the sorghum Sudan grass. And so that's gonna be a lot more profitable.
Okay. You're definitely getting a question on that because you put it up there and the fact that you were working on those as well. So you could get to that.
Yes, definitely.
One other thing, when you did your introduction, if you go right back to your first slide where you got your graph of growing, you talk about cool season, you've got 2 warm season forages on your chart, so you be careful. with
Yeah,
that.
that's
Yeah,
true.
make sure you tell them you don't, make sure you identify which ones are which.
Yes, thank you. I will definitely do that.
Because you know, but they don't know you.
That's very true.
Other questions? Thank you, Katie.
Go back to conference room.
Well, since I'm presenting at the same time, I won't see it, so I'm glad I got to see yours.